Hi, mystery recapped here. A young woman named Sarah is driving home late at night when she sees a car crash. She stops to help and finds a man, David, trapped inside. She pulls him out and he is badly injured. Sarah calls for an ambulance, but David tells her not to. He says he has a secret and asks her to take him to his cabin in the woods. Sarah agrees and they drive to the cabin. At the cabin, Sarah tends to David's wounds. He tells her that he is a scientist and that he has discovered. Today we'll be talking about a horror sci-fi film titled Await Further Instructions. Spoilers follow. Be careful and stay safe. The film begins with Nick and Annie, a couple who journeyed to London to see Nick's relatives and enjoy Christmas together. Nick appears unenthusiastic about seeing his family, so Annie attempts to lift his spirit. Upon their arrival, Nick's mother, Bate, welcomes the pair, appearing quite thrilled to see her son and his girlfriend. Nick then presents Angie to his grandfather, whom she greets courteously, but the grandfather music offers no reply. A short while later, Nick's dad, Tony, comes downstairs, but rather than speaking kindly to his son, his initial question is why he hadn't come to see them in 3 years. Angie attempts to smooth things over and introduces herself to Tony, but he too appears quite distant with her. Soon after, Nick's sister Kate and her husband Scott arrive as well and happily greet everyone. Kate is very pregnant and states that she is concerned because many hospitals nowadays have foreign doctors working in them. This immediately bothers Angie, who is a doctor and of Indian heritage. Music, so Kate quickly says sorry, explaining she didn't intend to upset her, even though it was clearly aimed music and hurtful. Afterward, the family starts watching television together, and a news report about a recent terrorist attack appears. When he sees this, the grandpa starts saying it's all due to immigrants in the country, music, which really upsets Angie. She informs him that he's mistaken, but even Kate supports her grandfather, causing a big disagreement between her and Nick. Finally, Nick determines he's reached his limit, and he heads upstairs with his girlfriend. Bate then says sorry for what occurred and pleads with him to stay, but Nick tells her it's not her responsibility and embraces her. Later, Nick informs Angie that time is passing, so he proposes they get up early the next day and depart without speaking to anyone. Meanwhile, the grandfather dozes off while watching TV, and the set soon begins to act up. The following morning, Nick and Danny prepare to depart, but upon attempting to open the door, they discover it's coated in an unusual black material. They examine other doors and even all the windows, but it seems every single one is blocked by something. Nick then takes an axe and attempts to smash it, but he doesn't even make a mark. Before long, the other family members arrive too, curious about what's going on. They search the entire house and discover that all exits are blocked, making it impossible to leave. Tony believes a catastrophe might have happened outdoors, and the government has isolated them to keep them safe. They switch on the TV, and on each channel, a message pops up telling the family to remain inside and await more directions. Tony thinks it's probably an emergency broadcast, and when they look at their phones and computers, they see they have no internet or signal. But Tony stays calm and states the government will save them music and proposes they celebrate Christmas just like any other day. Afterward, he talks alone with Scott and requests music, him to be ready if problems arise, explaining that as men, they sometimes have to make tough choices. We could have music for dinner, Grandpa. Afterward, the family eats together at the table when Angie starts coughing and Kate instantly blames her for being sick. Nick silences his sister, but the grandpa again begins making prejudiced comments, causing another disagreement between them. But Tony quiets everyone and starts carving the turkey right as another message shows up on the screen, telling them not to eat the food because it's poison. When he sees this, Tony tells everyone to stop eating and then throws out all the food, but Nick attempts to prevent him, which causes a disagreement between them. At the same time, Kate tells her husband he's no help as her father takes control. So Scott chooses to take action. He breaks up the fight between Nick and Tony and then forcefully strikes Nick for disobeying his father. A short time later, the words on the television screen change, telling them that everything is tainted and they need to wash themselves with bleach. Everyone obeys the command and proceeds to the restrooms where they wash themselves with cleansing solution. At a later point, the family is again together in the living room when a number of syringes drop down the chimney. The elves are experiencing an unusual year. A message on the television tells them to use the vaccination kits because of contamination, but Angie cautions that this is a poor choice, noting that they are unaware of what the kits actually contain. It is revealed that the syringes have already been utilized, but the family won't heed her warnings and starts injecting themselves sequentially, even Cade, who is very pregnant. Following that, Tony makes Nick and Danny inject themselves too. Having no other choice, they unwillingly agree. However, shortly after, events become grim as the grandfather suddenly starts throwing up a black liquid, then falls to the ground lifeless, stunning everyone present. Angie quickly faults Tony for this, saying he made them inject themselves, but Tony suggests the vaccine might not have worked on his father due to his advanced age. Kate concurs, proposing that the vaccine might have triggered an allergic response in Grandpa, since everyone else is unaffected. Soon after, the television displays another message stating they must put the syringes back through an opening in the door. Scott then pushes the syringes through the opening, located amidst black wires, but he quickly grows curious. He then places his hand into the opening while calling for assistance, and in a surprising turn of events, the wire severs his finger, causing him to shriek in fear. Meanwhile, Nick and Tony are seen covering the grandfather's deceased body with sheet. Here, we discover the reason for Tony's severity. It is revealed that as a child, his father would hit him for minor infractions such as needing to use the restroom, asserting that a true man could control himself. This stirs Tony's feelings, but he doesn't linger on them and quickly goes back to the living room. Then the television shows a new message stating that someone among them is sick and needs to be separated. Kate instantly blames Angie because she had coughed before, and the other family members agree with her. After hearing this, Nick gets mad and starts fighting with his family, but they all team up against him. To de-escalate the situation, Angie consents to being confined in a different room, which happens to be the very room containing the grandpa's body. Nick and Danny then speak through the door, and she suggests to Nick that he ought to try unplugging the television to see what occurs. Following this, Nick goes downstairs and switches off the television right as his sister spots him and promptly contacts their father. Tony switches the television back on, and it now displays a sequence of symbols before a warning message pops up, explaining that interfering with the signal might endanger their lives. This causes Kate to become very angry, so she tells Scott to hit her brother. Nick attempts to go up the stairs, but Scott grabs him, and they start to fight on the staircase. Amidst the commotion, Kate, positioned right behind them, is inadvertently struck, leading her to tumble from the staircase and fracture her leg. When this happens, everyone hurries to her aid, as Scott remains frozen in disbelief. When he looks at the television, a message appears for a moment. "I observe you." Nick and Bates start to worry a lot because Kate's bone has come out of her leg and she is losing a lot of blood. Angie is the sole doctor present, but Tony surprisingly prevents her from leaving, stating she is infected. Tony then acts unconcerned and states he's heading to his study, telling them music not to bother him. Once he's gone, a distraught Bates starts weeping for her child and begs the people on television for assistance, but she receives no reply. A distressed Scott then informs Nick that they had already picked out names for their child. A young bigot if it was a male, or the royal if it was a female. Afterward, Nick talks to Angie from outside her room and explains Kate's situation. Angie states that Kate will not live for much longer without prompt medical care. Nick is fed up, so he attempts to locate a way out of the house, but without success. He finally reaches a restroom where he begins to smash through a pipe to discover an escape route. He succeeds in creating an opening and extends his mobile phone on a pole with the camera activated to capture what lies beyond. After looking at the video, Nick observes a tentacled monster flinging itself at the phone. Inside the living room, the television displays a warning that the perimeter has been compromised. After the alert sounds, Tony brings Scott along to locate Nick, who they discover in the restroom. Nick attempts to show his father the video, but Tony disregards him and starts hitting him hard. Tony then fastens Nick to a chair right as a new message shows up on the TV, telling them to get details from the sleeper agent. Tony believes his son is the secret agent, so he starts to torment him to get details. Even Scott is shocked and attempts to intervene, but Tony ignores him, takes a scalpel, and begins to cut his son. Then Tony gets ready to remove his son's eye. However, just then, Bate lets out a scream, stopping them. They all hurry to look, and Bate surprisingly announces that Kate has died music. Even with this bad news, Tony doesn't react much, so Bate hits him hard on the face and says he's always been a stuck-up jerk and that she hates him. Meanwhile, Angie discovers a television in the room, and upon activating it, she observes symbols resembling those previously seen on the TV. Angie turns on the TV and discovers something that deeply disturbs her. Before long, a new message shows up on the TV, announcing that quarantine is now active in room 1, and then dark smoke starts coming out of the wires. It also tells everyone who survived to go back to the ground floor. Nick hurries up the stairs to rescue his girlfriend, but the door is shut. Scott then gives him the key, and Nick succeeds in getting his girlfriend out of the area. Elsewhere, his mom is stuck with heavy smoke all around her, causing her pain. Nick makes a frantic effort to assist her, but he's unable to. Bate tells them to go and save themselves before the room blows up and she passes away. After that, the remaining people gather in the main room as the dark smoke starts to pull back. An annoyed Nick pulls the plug on the television, but it remains on, showing multiple messages that read, "I am reborn, and I bring salvation." Tony, an extremist believer, sees the television as Jesus Christ and starts to celebrate, asking the TV for a sign. "Please, Jesus, with your numerous arms, guide me." Just then, Kate's stomach starts to stir, and Annie understands that the infant is still living and that she can do a C-section to rescue it. She then explains to Nick that she discovered a television in her room, but upon opening it, she found a heart inside, as if it were alive. At that moment, the television instructs them that they need to offer a sacrifice for the baby, and it even says the names Ruby and Lewis, which makes Scott feel upset. After watching TV, Tony and Scott take Nick to be sacrificed. Angie frantically attempts to intervene, informing Nick that she will rescue the infant if he releases Nick, and Scott eventually gives in. Then Angie goes on to perform the C-section. As Nick and Tony keep arguing, which makes her concerned, she pleads with Scott to prevent Tony from acting if he wishes to safeguard music, his child. So Scott hurries to step in, but Tony kills him with an axe. Tony then starts to choke his son, so Angie hits him with a bottle, causing him to fall to the ground. Because he is still living, Nick lets the TV fall on Tony's head and finishes him off. But the danger isn't gone yet, because moments later, the broken TV stands up by itself, and a bunch of wires starts coming out from inside it. Every window shatters, and identical wires emerge all over the house, entering Tony's neck and exiting his mouth. Tony's body, now under the creature's control, comes near Nick and orders him to worship it or be destroyed. Nick understands that the monster is unable to harm them since they are the sole remaining people, and it requires someone to adore it. He then smashes the heart-shaped center of the monster within the television, which causes a huge blast, yet it ultimately alters nothing. Then we observe that the monster is still living, and it employs its wires to trap Nick and Angie and violently murder them. Tony's body, still under control, picks up the television and puts it down beside Kate's body. The wires take over Kate's body, leaving behind just her bones and her infant, who is unexpectedly still living. The television then shows a different message that reads, "Greetings, Princess. Bow to me," but the baby clearly doesn't grasp what's going on. As the film concludes, the camera zooms out to display a wide view of the whole neighborhood, making it clear that every house has suffered the same assault.